Thank you for joining us on Western Synergy. My name is Nathan Johnson, and this is a podcast about amazing people, entrepreneurs, innovators, and just generally interesting topics across Western Canada. I'm joined today by Arlan Schults, the creator of the AuraWand.
Creator, inventor, committer of.
And so I'm here to learn more about kind of the fine arts and specifically the audio space with you today, and more about your invention. Maybe you could give just a brief introduction to our audience here.
Sure. So I'm a professor here at the University of Lethbridge in the composition area in music and also in digital audio arts. So I teach in two major areas. I'm one of the founding faculty members of the digital audio arts program here about, I guess, almost 15 years ago now. So a lot of this space was built as a result of that new program coming to us here in southern Alberta. My research primarily, I'm a composer. So I compose music for large ensembles, small ensembles, chamber music, but I also use a lot of technology. And a lot of that technology that I was interested in centered around the creation of musical space. So multiple kinds of space, surround type spaces where you could envelop an audience and create an environment where an audience was enveloped by sound.
So when I was growing up, I was really big into home theater. Is there a difference between like the audio space for, say, like composing music versus the stuff that you're into, or say games and like movies and stuff, or is it all kind of the same
and this sort of
technology?
leads into later. We'll talk more about
Sure.
how that my work in with AuraWave Technologies has kind of bridges that gap between sort of consumer grade electronics and then sort of studio based electronics. When you're talking about the creation of new works that involve spatial audio, in my case, we usually deploy speakers in very creative and unusual ways. I mean, I was just recently at McGill University, and they have a 64 channel room, which is literally a giant box, 7,300 cubic meter space filled with speakers. And so we were taking our device in there and pushing sound around. So literally, it's a three-dimensional space. It's a space that allows you to push sound around in 3 dimensions. You're sitting in it, and you can move sound pretty much anywhere. And so I'm interested in creating spaces like that.
So
where
just
you
so
can,
when you say move sound, are you meaning like as you're around the room coming from different speakers, so it creates like a different direction?
Right. And
just
so,
like a more simplified
that's
view.
right. So you're using computer algorithms to actually generate trajectories so that you take a sound object and you move it around in physical space. But in reality, you're just changing, volume levels and phase structures and so forth, so that the sound appears to be moving around you, but really it's just moving in around the speakers. So when I create simpler versions of pieces, 5 or 8 channels surrounding an audience, no height dimensions, just, an azimuthal array, which is a flat planar array, which sort of is on the horizon kind of thing, head level. And then I'll take microphones and I'll place them on the speakers, put on the instruments that I'm using, and then I will move those instruments around while the piece is taking place. And it got increasingly difficult to do that with a mouse. Because you can imagine you have a couple of instruments, you maybe preset trajectories, so you're moving them around, but there's one instrument that you actually want to have more control over. How do you do that with a mouse? Moving it in 2 dimensions is hard enough, but 3 dimensions, it's not possible. So I thought, it would be interesting to create a device where I could control it actually by using human gestures, by just actually gesturing, much like a conductor would conduct physical space, conduct an orchestra. You could conduct physical space with a device. So I came up with, I have a background in engineering and some technology, and so I put together a device that I thought might work. And lo and behold, I was able to push sound around in interesting and unusual spaces, different kinds of configurations, and basically grab an instrument virtually with this device. And actually, wherever I moved, that's where the sound moved. So if I moved it up, the sound moved up. If I moved it from side to side, it moved from side to side. And so this allowed me to map actual sonic objects onto human gestures. So it physicalizes the act of audio spatialization, and that was a really great new tool. And so that's where my research has been for the last 5 years, is in developing sort of a refined system of gestural control for immersive audio, because immersive audio has become a new industry standard, if you want to call it that. Essentially, Apple Music pays more money for content creators that deliver content in three-dimensional space. There are different kinds of three-dimensional space, which you alluded to earlier, which was the whole notion of there's the home surround theater, there's studio spaces, there's large diffusion spaces in concert halls. The most common is your little set of earbuds that you put in your ears, and we call that a binaural space. It's a binaural space because it's aural and it's bi, two, right? Sticks, and it takes advantage of the space between your ears, literally, the phase difference between them, to create the illusion that sound is moving around outside your head. And so this is where a lot of the modern content creation space is in binaural audio creation. Movies are designed so that when people are listening in their binaural headset, the jet passes overhead and it feels like it's passing right through you. So the audio industry has been very, very good at creating computer algorithms to simulate how sound actually physicalizes around the human ears. However, what it has not really done very well in the industry is allowed us to control how that sound is moved around the human ears.
So, like,
Yeah.
effectively giving a little more control back to the artist for them to decide
That's
what
exactly
they want.
right. So, we spent a lot of time at the Audio Engineering Society meeting this past October in New York. And we're talking to all these software companies, and we're asking them, how are you mixing? How are you mastering? How are you creating dynamic spatial events in your software? And they're like, well, mouse, trackpad, joystick. One guy was talking to us about drawing a trajectory, a sound trajectory on a tablet using a pie plate and a Apple stylus. This is how they're actually creating their content, which has very little to do with musical interaction, very little to do with real-time interaction, and certainly divorces the engineer from any real input into the sort of physical manifestation of how this sound is actually viscerally affecting, their audience. So when you're designing the sound for the Sphere in Las Vegas and you're trying to draw a trajectory across the Sphere, instead of using a pie plate, just move your hand,
Okay.
And so we can essentially now simplify this whole process by creating what essentially amounts to a freestanding, gesturally controlled hardware panner. So it's like taking the panner, all the multidimensional controls that you have sitting on the mixing board, and putting them in a single device.
Maybe to explain for our audience what a panner is.
A panner is a physical device that allows you to move sound from one channel to another, from one speaker to another.
Okay.
And the more speakers you have, the more complex it becomes to move sound around. So if you have more, if you can imagine, if you have like 5 channels of audio, how do you come up with a dial that actually moves around 5 channels seamlessly? That doesn't require computer assistance to do that. And if you add height channels, how do you control as the sound moves from down below to up high, or comes from high or low, or moves across, the physical space of where your body is? How do you control that? So it's a very difficult problem in the industry, and it leads to workflow issues too, which is one of the things that we're actually arguing why our device actually will probably be somewhat disruptive in the industry, is because it's a device that enables content creators in three-dimensional space, three-dimensional audio spaces, to easily create very complex motion audio trajectories in multiple different kinds of spaces. Now, it's mostly designed like for there are two different kinds of spatialization. There's static spatialization, where essentially you move a sound to a place and you just let it sit there and it just plays back at you. There's dynamic spatialization when things are constantly moving. This is where this device really shines, is that it allows you to sort of grab onto a sound object and move it dynamically in space by simple gestures.
Is when you talk about like the dynamic movement, so I have been, I'm a big fan of music, like pretty much everything to do with audio. I own way too many speakers to be considered healthy. And I still have like some of my original studio speakers that I bought when I was very, very young, and I still lug them around with me. When you talk about an audio space, what genre or the category of this is like, does like say a rock band are they really concerned about audio spatial awareness like to a person, or is this more for like say movies? And I know from game development you can do some of the stuff like within with the game engines where you can control where the audio position object is, or is this kind of like a this covers everything?
Well, I mean, think of the Beatles, okay? If you go like way back, okay? When stereo recordings became, the industry standard, the notion of panning things, which is moving sound from left to right channels, was utilized extensively by these bands like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all of these bands who sort of came up and were utilizing the studio as essentially a musical instrument. They thought of the stereo field as being part of the expressive palette in which they were existing as a group. The notion of how stereo space is being used was also becoming more and more complicated, and as a result, bands are pushing those boundaries constantly. There are algorithms, for instance, that allow you within a stereo space to make things seem further back than they really are, or further forward than they really are in the mix, right? So there are ways that you can manipulate stereo space to give the imitation that there are more channels going on at the same time. But really, it's like the old adage, for antennas, the more metal in the sky, the better. It's the same thing with audio production. The more speakers you have, the more accurate your sound reproduction can be when you're dealing with creating a musical space. To answer your question, content creators like musicians, bands, game designers, rock bands, garage bands, people who could, create electronic dance music, there are two things driving their interest in spatial audio. One of them is increased revenue. Apple Music pays more money for multi-channel audio. So if you essentially create a Dolby mix or an ambisonic mix or some kind of binaural mix of your audio, you make more money when you sell it on some of these platforms. The other side of it is it enriches the ability of each of these types of ensembles to actually express their content in a dynamic environment. So it's an exciting new way to enliven their musical materials. So this device that we've created is meant for like home studio use. It's meant for like anyone who creates audio in a binaural or multi-channel audio space and needs to push sound around easily, without the hassle of having to redraw trajectories and so forth on your spatialization screens. It's a pretty powerful tool, and so we're excited about what its use could be, industry wide.
Is this type of audio like access? Like I know growing up, DTS and Dolby were the bigger ones for 5-channel home theater, and later on, some of the newer technologies that came out with those became licensable. So, as an example, I know right now to get access to certain Dolby features and certain, I think DTS is, I don't know who owns DTS, or DTS is the actual manufacturer. Anyways, to get access to those on computers, sometimes you have to pay a licensing fee to get access to the drivers. Is this advanced audio technique where Apple's paying for it, is this stuff readily available?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. For instance, when you buy a subscription to Logic Pro by Apple, which is a standard piece of software that students buy all the time, it's relatively inexpensive compared to some of the bigger digital audio workstations. it comes prepackaged with Dolby Atmos, the whole system. So you can actually mix in multidimensional audio with that system. You can, and of course, this plays into the whole ecosystem, which is trying in some respects to advantage content creators who are making this kind of content, right?
Is everyone, like, would you say like 100% of consumers have access to
Yes.
listen to these experiences?
Yes. This is why it's kind of powerful in the sense that the end result of binaural mixing is really audio files that are in a particular phase relationship that could be played by anybody on any headset and have relatively the same experience, right? Now, if you play that on a stereo system without headphones, it has a different effect than if you were to put on headphones. That's why we talk about binaural mixing as having a very particular kind of effect on the listener, right? Because it takes advantage of something called head-related transfer function, which is the physics of how our ears are placed.
Mhm.
And so, people have different size of spacings and so forth. So we take a general average of the distance between your ears, and we use that to sort of calculate how the phase relationships between the audio that are actually being manipulated can actually give us positional coordinates and create the illusion that sound is moving around us.
So talking more about the device that's sitting next to us here, this is you're saying this is your engineering sample?
Yeah, this is an
Yeah.
engineering sample. It's the third generation. The generation just before this was essentially literally a stick from Michael's craft store, crusted with hot glued electronics on it.
Nice.
I showed it to the North American Director of Research for Spatial Audio, and he's just, this is so great. He said, no matter what happens, please keep a picture of this, because this is something you're going to want for the rest of your life. Because essentially it worked, right? It showed proof of concept, and it enabled us to get a little bit of investment money to, move forward and actually develop this device. But yeah, this device is actually pretty advanced. It has, a near military grade inertial measurement unit built into it. So wherever you are, so if you're the center of the audience and you want to start moving sound around relative to that position, this device will measure that position from where you are, and then it will calculate all of the coordinates horizontally and vertically to manipulate the audio based on its coordinates.
So what's the dimensional sensor that's being used, like ultrasonic, infrared laser?
It's actually using a standard inertial measurement unit, which works on relative position. So it just, wherever it's sitting, that's
Okay.
where it measures its position from. Azimuth from side to side, elevation up and down, and then distance back and forth here.
Okay.
And then there's also all kinds of cool, like there's a squeeze sensor built in that will allow you, as you're moving the sound over time, as you slowly squeeze, you can change the characteristics of the sound as it moves. So you can map it onto things like a filter or a reverberation system, so that as the sound moves through space, it actually has some kind of dynamic elements associated with it as well.
Do you have a plan for, like, is this device supported by everything? Like, is your goal that you can use this on, like,
With any
Windows,
DAW.
Mac, Linux, or any DAW?
Any
Okay.
digital audio workstation. The idea is right now we are developing a plugin suite for it, so that essentially you just load up the scaffold and it'll talk to your DAW flawlessly. And it already does, actually. It connects to your computer through Bluetooth Low Energy MIDI.
Okay.
So it's actually sending MIDI data directly to your digital audio workstation. So it's, everything here is a universal connectivity, and it's incredibly stable. We have been very surprised about how this is a pre-commercial version, and about how stable the device actually is in its communication protocol with whatever computer you're talking to, and also how nicely and smoothly it tracks motion. It does a beautiful job tracking both horizontal and vertical coordinates, and translating those into usable coordinates that a audio workstation or a spatialization system can use.
So is the next kind of steps for this device to then build the commercialized version of it?
We have a set of engineers now who are waiting to receive we should be taking delivery of the prototypes by mid-December, so around the 15th of December. And we already have some, I guess you would call, device validators, partners in the industry who work in spatial audio. They were attracted to this device when we pitched it to them, and they said they wanted to see what it could do for their own workflow. And so, we have everyone from sort of, classical music recording engineers to, spatial audio specialists. One audio engineer works on the Elden Ring symphonic experience in France, and so they're sometimes working in their hotel room trying to get spatialization to work. And he said, "I wish I had that device when I was in my hotel room because I'm still using my mouse to try to get all these complex trajectories built for the sounds that we're trying to make the show work."
Like, it sounds amazing, and I can definitely, from being an audio appreciator, I wouldn't say like an audio file, but an audio appreciator, I can understand how that would be a really big deal. Do you have anyone that's in this space that is doing something similar, or are you alone in this space?
There are no commercially available hardware gestural panners. Like the ones that have been used, there's been a lot of research done on motion capture spaces. So, for instance, using lanterns, external lanterns that capture motion and allow you to sort of manipulate space. The problem is audio engineers. We love audio engineers, and audio engineers love this, the
Mhm,
board. They don't like to move off the board.
mhm.
And this is something that's continuously told us, whenever we talk to audio engineering companies that make that are manufacturers of mixing boards, is that audio engineers like to stay on the board. So anything that gets them off that space, right, is kind of new and disruptive. So talking to manufacturers of audio industry hardware is different than talking to perhaps early adopters. And that's the strategy we've been taking with a device that could potentially be disruptive in the space. We feel that this is added value to any board. I mean, we don't feel this is going to take away from the use of a mixing board. A mixing board will always be a really important instrument in the studio. But having this sitting on your board, when as soon as you need to move to a multi-channel or a multi-audio, multi-dimensional space, that is literally you just grab it and you start punching in your automation to be able to draw your space in gestural space, is a very powerful tool. And it could be, value added to any piece of technology that's currently in use in the studio. So that's how we've been pitching it to, board manufacturers. However, the audio engineers are a much easier sell because they are the ones who are on the front lines trying to create content in the space. They know what some of the issues are with some of the tools they're currently using. There are chat rooms devoted to the problems of creating spatial audio. And why are there no good tools to help us with this? So it's really at this point now, you guys are helping to do that, to get the word out. This is a new space for us. It's a new space in Alberta. I mean, the whole notion of, gestural control for immersive audio, it's a niche industry, but has the potential to be sitting on everyone's table who uses surround space audio.
No, it's really exciting. It's super fascinating because it's always interesting, especially on this podcast, where we find people that are really, truly kind of hitting that innovation mark.
Part of the success we've had so far has been due to a lot of the support we've received from, Alberta Innovates, for instance, who
Mhm.
saw the technology sector that we were working in, saw the interest that we were generating, and also the potentially disruptive nature of the product. And they did their own analysis and sent it out to their own experts and came back and said, yes, we want to help support you, with developing the engineering of your product. And so, the province has been really great about recognizing that this technology is actually important and is useful in the industry. So we want to sort of give back to that ecosystem as we grow, and so that we can help nurture other smaller companies that are trying to work their way up.
Have you figured out any pricing or costing or anything?
The problem is when you're dealing with prototype devices, the cost is astronomically higher than you would say production models. This device was actually originally designed to move sound around live, so that you actually had sound being made on stage, and that you could throw it out into the audience and actually surround your audience with some aspect of the audio that you were creating on stage. And so we're reaching out to audio professionals and people who are performers. We're thinking of, like, even electronic dance music artists, DJs, people who, actually use surround systems in clubs and so forth, and would love, to be able to push sound around from the stage and actually move it around their audience space in real time in conjunction with the sort of general vibe of the evening. They
Yeah,
could actually engage with audio spatialization, almost like a sonic dance with their audience.
that's amazing.
And that's kind of one of the other markets that's available.
Interesting story and journey. What was kind of like one of the, like, let's say, more difficult moments that you guys were going over when you were developing this thing? Like, what were some of the roadblocks or walls you hit maybe?
Well, I mean, of course, the earliest roadblocks are how do you, you have this really great idea, you think it could be potentially disruptive. How do you convince somebody that this is actually going to be worth your time spending? We're already, in a university setting, fine arts technology is, the university is incredibly supportive, but there are a lot of voices clamoring for very little money. And so, that's the reality of the space we're in. And so, fine arts, we're seen as performers or artists. And as a result, we don't really generate the sort of same kind of interest in technology that maybe some other, ecosystems would. So, in a way, that kind of disadvantaged us. However, it ended up advantaging us later, right? So when we initially pitched the idea of, maybe joining a pre-incubator or something like that, we were initially turned down. They thought, well, interesting device, but I got like 10 other people that have, really equally interesting things, but they're in the sciences. We understand the science tech. However, all it took was one person at Innovation Masterminds, Edmonton, Kelly McTish and her husband Chris, who sort of co-own Brass Dome Ventures and Innovation Masterminds. They caught hold of our technology, and they thought, well, this is interesting. So Kelly called me up. She said, look, you pitched this to the university, you pitched this to a couple of other places, pitch it to us, pitch it, show us what it is. And so I gave her a demo, showed her what it is. I think I even had her put on a set of headphones and showed her how we could move sound around. And she was just, oh, this is crazy. I didn't know you could do this. Let me get back to you. And so within a month or so, we were brought in to Innovation Masterminds as a pre-incubator. It's basically a way of meeting other like-minded professionals, and essentially you get mentored by a group of people who are founders.
Mhm.
Each of them are founders. They've founded several companies. Some of them are in the tech space. Some of them are tech space adjacent. And every 2 weeks you meet with these people, and they put you on the hot seat and ask you really hard questions about, how are you going to develop your company? What's your market? Do you have a business canvas? What's your business plan? All of these things, that I'm a musician and an artist, I'm not a business person.
Mhm.
So having business expertise kind of pointed at my direction and actually bringing me along was a huge, huge advantage. And I would say that, for young entrepreneurs who are out there, get in an ecosystem where you can find supportive people who could introduce you to industry professionals who want to help. Because you can't go it alone. You got to have someone in your corner somewhere that can, introduce you to people, get you involved in programs that can help make your business plan better, show you what the road to financing is, all those sorts of things. So at the end of my 1.5 years or whatever I was in that ecosystem in the IMYEG program, we got some private investment funds. So we got invested in, and then it made us eligible for some grants. And so we more than doubled our investment with non-dilutive funding when we got out of the pre-incubator program. So that enabled us to get to this place where we are now. And so we're now, our runway is still pretty good. And we're now in a place where what we want to do is start generating interest in the device, look at partnership development, possibilities, licensing agreements. We have the intellectual property as well. I mean, we're filing, IP all the time, in fact. because of some of the information that we get from as the product develops. We find that there's more intellectual property that could be protected, and so that becomes a bigger asset for the company, and helps us to sort of grow our our valuation. So these are terms I never would have spoken with you about in the past.
Yeah,
but I've had to learn them and had to learn how to work at it. But at the same time, I'm also trying to make art with this stuff.
your advice about being able to reach out and get those support mechanics is just something I can't stress enough for anyone entering into a space
Yes.
where you're creating things or coming up with ideas, is that, lean into others for them to just ask you the questions, make sure you've thought about things and really kind of push on you. If you're really truly interested in success, you be vetted. People have walked your path, people have walked
Yeah.
similar paths, and they can help
Yes.
you avoid a lot and speed things up. And it clearly sounds that there was a massive benefit to you on that subject, because it's really interesting hearing your whole journey, especially from the position you are, because you don't think much about like a composer and technology, right?
No.
But they're
No.
like it's a very constant thing. And when I first started learning about like more composed music, my introduction was to like kind of like Hans Zimmer, but I just thought because he had like a massive soundboard that had computers on it, that was like the closest a composer would get to digital technology.
Yeah.
But this is really, really impressive, and this takes it even further, right? So that's super exciting. Again, I was joined today by Arlan Schults. I really appreciate you coming in and talking with us. It was super informative. I learned an incredible amount about audio technology and the fine arts in the technology sector. I'm Nathan Johnson, and I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us on the Western Synergy podcast. And I look forward to talking to more people soon. And again, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for talking to us about our device, and we look forward to bringing it back in whatever new incarnation it engages with.